Now, I've got the great pleasure of inviting our first speaker, Gregor Macfie. Did I say that right? You did great. Now, Gregor told me that I had to roll my R's to get this right. And given that we were in Elvis territory, I wasn't quite sure which one he was talking about. So anyway, I hopefully I got the name right. Now, Gregor Macfie is the Director of the Office of the New South Wales Advocate for Children and Young People. The Advocate promotes the wellbeing of children and young people aged 0 to 24 years and their participation in the decisions that affect their lives. Gregor has worked in a number of senior roles, both in government and non-government organisations, including the New South Wales Commission for Children and Young People, the Australian Council of Social Service, ACOSS, and the Tenants Union of New South Wales and the New South Wales Cabinet Office. So I'd like us to welcome Gregor and really enjoy his contribution to the conference. Thank you, Gregor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and to pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'd also like to thank the organising committee for inviting the Office of the Advocate for Children and Young People to come and speak to you today. Andrew Johnson, who is the Advocate, very much wanted to be here, and if you'd ever seen him present, you probably would want to have him here instead of me too. But he's doing an inclusion consultation in Western Sydney at the moment as part of work that the Department of Premier and Cabinet are doing. So his apologies. So the topic, I think, that we're talking about today, or I'm talking about today, is engaging children and young people, lessons learned from consultations on the New South Wales Strategic Plan for children and young people. This is a big piece of work we've been doing. I think the lessons, such as they are implicit in the presentation. I'll certainly draw out a few of those lessons, but I hope that it chimes with your work, and we're certainly the first to acknowledge that really the expertise in terms of working with children and young people, understanding where they come from, the different tools, techniques, approaches, and philosophies, lie in the room here today, and those that work daily with children and young people. And indeed, our work's not possible without working through organisations that work daily with children and young people. Can anyone tell me where this quote comes from? The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Well, you're in the right realm, yes. I think Socrates, Plato quoting Socrates 2,500 years ago today. I think that we obviously in our role as the advocate for children and young people, we're there to say good things about children and young people and challenge stereotypes. But you certainly do see that in terms of some of the reporting that you see around children and young people. But we thought we would undertake some work to see, well, what are actually children and young people thinking? What are some of their attitudes? So we undertook big consultations around the state, but we also did some polling. We went through a polling company to reach children and young people 14 to 24. And what we found is really a generation that we've called Generation Compassion, very motivated by social justice, by social policies and social issues. When they were asked about the qualities of a good society for children and young people, they said things like respect, safety, supportive environments, equality, and inclusion. And when they talked about respect, it wasn't just about respect being shown towards them, it was about them showing respect towards others, and sometimes in terms of the focus group conversations that we were having, it was about them feeling bad if other young people weren't showing respect. So a very sophisticated understanding of that word. In terms of what their hopes were for the future and what they wanted to do, they wanted overwhelmingly to make the world a better place and bring about positive change. And one of the very consistent themes, both in the polling and in the consultations that we've done, is this importance of a good education. You might have seen some of this was reported in the press a month or so ago, but most of them rated, or at least a third of them rated their parents or their carers or guardians as their heroes, with only a much smaller number sort of listing movie stars, pop and rock stars, which in terms of what we understand from other generations, this is actually a bit of a change. It's not something that's always been there when we ask these questions. They're one of the biggest groups to undertake volunteer work in the community, those aged 14 to 24, so nearly 3 in 5 have undertaken volunteer work in the past 12 months. And of those that have volunteered, the vast majority said that their motivation was really to do the right thing, to give back to the community, to do the right thing ethically. So I think it's very important that we acknowledge that when we're thinking about our work with young people, to nurture it and to harness it. I mean, this is a generation of young people that are currently looking after the world and us and what have you, but certainly in the future, as we all age, they're the ones that are going to be looking after us. So even at a selfish level, it's something very important to encourage. So we split some of the. We also asked adults what they thought. We asked the same questions of those over 25 and children and young people 14 to 24, what their fears were, what their hopes were, and what their heroes were. So we've been through some of that. But it's also instructive looking at the fears that they don't always align. So drugs, alcohol and sex was much more of a concern for those over 12, a bit more of a concern for those over 25 than it was for the young people. But crime, violence and discrimination were rated more highly by the young people. Very interesting one we thought was that the second most reported fear was too much technology and social media. So that's something in terms of when we talk about what came out of the consultations, this idea of connection. There's often an assumption that that young people want, and indeed they are connected through social media and the internet, but there's also a very strong desire to connect with other people face to face. Just about us, the Office of the Advocate for Children and Young People. It's a relatively new office. It was established January last year, and it evolved from the former Commission for Children and Young People. Its main role is to promote the welfare and safety and well-being of children and young people aged 0 to 24 in New South Wales. It has a particular focus on encouraging the participation and promoting the participation of children and young people in the decisions that affect their lives, both in terms of our own work, but encouraging and supporting other organisations to do that wherever possible. One of the new bits of the legislation is that there's a requirement for our office to develop a strategic plan for children and young people in New South Wales. So we think that's the first legislative strategic plan in Australia. It may even be the first internationally to have a legislative plan of this kind. In terms of our work we do, the legislation requires that there's a focus on disadvantaged and vulnerable children and young people in all of our work, and to focus on systemic issues affecting children and young people. We're also, the New South Wales Youth Advisory Council is another independent advisory body of young people aged 12 to 24, and our office is responsible for supporting that council. We've got a bit more information on them a bit further in the presentation. And a lot of our work really is about making recommendations to government and non-government organisations on policies, practices, services and programs for children and young people, but where they have had the input into that information, so bringing their voices into that decision-making process at as many levels as possible, and obviously working with and through the many organisations that do work to promote the wellbeing of children and young people. So in terms of the plan, we use, this is the buzzword, one of the buzzwords, the co-design process. But we were very conscious that for this first plan for children and young people, that children and young people should be the first to have a say on what the themes and directions for the plan should be. And so we embarked on a comprehensive consultation program across the state to get the views of children and young people on what were really 4 key questions. They were open-ended and unprompted questions, and we asked these in a whole range of different ways, but we asked them what was working well for children and young people in New South Wales. And it was important that we asked that first. Very easy to go to ask, well, what's not working well, and people go there. But if you say, well, you know, the sports facility is good in town, and people say, yes, would you like them kept? Yes, that's a very good thing for us to be able to feed back to government. I think one of the things, Mary's relearning, that the children and young people, and we, as I said, we went to many different settings, really wanted to be involved and engaged in these broader questions about where the society was heading and what their role was, and having a say, and it was almost universal. So I think that's an important sort of observational learning from our point of view. And the other thing is that the most of the face-to-face consultation we did, which was with over 2,000 children and young people, were done by the advocate himself, along with various members of the team. But I think both for the services or the schools or the juvenile justice detention centres, that having the advocate there actually made, one, it was in terms of showing how serious, you know, we were about the work and involving young people, but also them understanding that role, that it was a government role, but it was also an independent role. It wasn't about you know, particular service or the child or the young person might be receiving, and that we were really there to listen to them, and that it was a process that was actually linked into something that we knew we could be very honest and genuine about. The young people were actually contributing to this plan. We're able to say, you are contributing, even if the draft plan, which is submitted to the government, it's not all, you know, taken on board. At least we can be genuine, and they were very keen to be involved. And you know, obviously we were very careful to make sure that we fed back to them what we'd heard and how it was going to be used. But I think those are a couple of the key lessons. So just in terms of some of the results that we got from the consultations, in terms of what was working well, education, access to sports and other activities came up very highly. Transport, access to sports fields and facilities. So they were some of the things that were working well. The things that weren't working well, and it was, even though the priorities of these shifted a bit, depending whether you're in Sydney or outside Sydney, or you were a homeless young person or a young person living, you know, or in a private school, wherever. Many of the same sorts of issues came up. In terms of what wasn't working so well, education again came up number 1. Transport, drug and alcohol use, employment and bullying were the top responses. They can be very, I mean, when we talk through, you might say, well, why is education, you know, working well and not working well? And the report that we released on these consultations digs down into, well, what does it mean when they say education's working well or it's not working well, for example. So when it's working well, many of the things, having good subjects available, a variety of sports and extracurricular activities, extra support when students are struggling, and good teacher-student relations are some of the things they said when education was working well. When it wasn't working well, they talked about lack of resources for public schools, rural schools, disadvantaged schools, class sizes being too big, not preparing us for real life, which you would have seen in some of the clips there. So that's just a taste of some of the richness of the data that we're able to gather. And again, in the report, we can cut some of that according to where people live, their age, what have you, to give us a bit of a richer view. So I think the next slides just run through that. So. And then in terms of what the priorities were, again, would have come through fairly clearly in the videos, but the 3 key priorities were education, transport and employment, with healthcare, and then mental health support and awareness coming next. And again, in terms of the qualities of a good society, respect, equality, safety, supportive environments and inclusion. So I just wanted to just go through a little bit how that's now been used, or basically the approach, I suppose, we took to developing the plan itself. So we ran consultations in many of the regions throughout New South Wales. We worked through, and very, very thankful for the support of the FACTS district directors and the DPC regional leadership groups and coordinators there for bringing together service groups, civil society organisations, business groups and others to take part in, much like a day like today, for about a morning, talking through many of the same issues that we asked the children and young people: what was working well, what wasn't, what did they think the qualities of a good society were for children and young people, and priorities. And the way we did it, the week before, or the 2 weeks before, we went and consulted with the young people on those questions in that regional area. So we went to primary school, high school and a youth group, PCYC or youth centre, asked them those questions, and then after asking the service networks what they thought the issues were, we then played the video of the young people saying, well, this is what we think the issues are in our local community. And I hadn't seen that before. I mean, we thought that idea of this sort of surprise of seeing what young people might say might be be effective in terms of what was discussed in the room. But it really was an amazing response when you saw police sitting down in the corner, and one of the girls saying, I don't know if we've got it in the video, but she was saying, well, what the traffic lights at such and such road need to be changed because we're getting, it's really dangerous and people are speeding, and the police are going, that's absolutely right, that's right. So I think it was an opportunity to bring that voice into that discussion. It got people thinking about, and just picking up on Joe's point, how are we all working together in a community it's all about the same sorts of outcomes that we're looking for, and bringing that group of people together who hadn't necessarily been brought together, saying, oh, well, look, we're running a program in the national park. We could really link up with some of the kids in resi care and get them to the park, for example. And they were just those connections that were made there on that day. But it seemed to energise and bring people together and say, we know why we're here, here's the voice of the young people, let's work together. So I must say, just at a personal level, it was very reassuring and very affecting, actually, and I think that was the mood in the room. So, as it says there, we gathered the views around 500 people who work with children and young people across New South Wales. And there was a report that was produced from those consultations, as well as the larger ones with the children and young people, and they're both on our website. So we've been working with an interdepartmental advisory group representing all the cluster agencies in the New South Wales government as we've been developing the plan and feeding this material to them. And they've been very supportive, one of the process, but also of the themes and directions that have been coming from children and young people and from the consultations with the service networks in the regions. So the draft goal of the plan is children and young people in New South Wales are safe, connected, respected and well, with opportunities to thrive and have their voices heard in their communities. And the draft themes, you've seen them already, safe. Oh, sorry. Should have told. Thank you. Safe, connect, respect, opportunity, wellbeing, and voice. So the plan's been structured under those themes, and there's objectives that sit there. And then we've been working with government in terms of what do we draw under those in terms of what the government's doing, what the government's planning to do. And the plan's currently being considered by government. So the very important part of the plan obviously is the monitoring, evaluation and learning. So once the plan's there, how are we going to involve young people in tracking the plan, monitoring it, and what can we learn from it? So we're working with a number of agencies, including the Department of Education, to set up pools of young people. So these are sort of 1,000 young people in a kind of research pool, and they agree to do 3 surveys a year that in terms of answering any questions around how are you travelling in terms of safety, how you know, the particular issues around healthcare, for example, around education. So it's particularly for government departments who want to get an early read in terms of what are young people feeling and thinking and experiencing in relation to the objective of the plan, but also in terms of government work around there. We'll also continue to do the polling of the attitudinal research around progress on the plan. So questions around, do you feel you have a voice in the things that you want to have a say in as your, you know, what is your local community? Do you feel safe walking to school? Those sorts of questions to get a feel for how a baseline, but then also monitoring how, just in terms of general attitudes, young people are feeling. We'll also set up task groups around specific aspects of the plan to dig down a little bit more deeply into elements of the plan to see what's working, what can we build on, what can we do as a, you know, at a government level, non-government level, to improve things. 5 minutes, okay. And then obviously there's also the Youth Advisory Council, Children and Young People as Quality Assessors is a program we're looking at where young people are looking at how people are, how services are acting in terms of their accessibility for young people, at their, if they want to improve, you know, their access, improve how to welcome, improve the delivery of the service. And My Local is a proposed online portal to bring together local information. Young people saying they want more information, more relevant, easy to find information about what's on in the local community. So that's something we're looking at as well. So we're doing ongoing, obviously there's a lot of ongoing engagement with in terms of what we're doing with children and young people. They were involved in the branding of our office. We had focus groups of young people who came up with the design brief for the brand of the new office. We trained them in, you know, what a brand was. That was then taken to the design agency, who came back with proposals, and then they were sort of very convinced by the process in terms of involving young people, and got the youngest people in their agencies involved, and came up with what you see in terms of our website, our brand. It's the, you know, the Apple, the iPhone generation. So it was a learning experience for us and for them, but also for the advertising agents in terms of that involvement. Just a few things, how you can engage online through our website, and also encouraging young people to become part of the Youth Advisory Council. We have various surveys online that we encourage agencies to encourage the young people they work with to get involved. We've got youth journalists and bloggers, part of the website again, looking for anyone that would like to do that. Any young people you think might be interested, please get in touch with the office and we can support them in that. And obviously, any feedback that young people have on the site itself, it's something that we want to improve all the time. It's a picture of the Youth Advisory Council. So that's quite an extensive process, over 300 applications. We worked again to try and ensure that we had as deep and wide diversity of life experience. It wasn't just about the school captains and those sorts of, although that's very valuable input, it's about young people with diverse experience. And Andrew Johnson, the advocate, and the minister were very keen that that be the case. So we have that well reflected on the council. We also have participation resources, so tips for how to engage with children and young people, which I'm sure don't necessarily need to reflect on here too much, but in terms of what young people say, the top tips are things like treat us with respect and don't be a try-hard, don't talk down to us, and then, you know, let them know what the process is, how they're going to get feedback, be open to new ideas, give them the space and time they need to say what they need to say, give them clear objectives. What are the limits of the decision making that you're doing? So we were, with the plan, we said, well, we can't determine what's in the plan, but we can be clear that what your input will be and what we will do, and steer clear of that professional jargon. We run a participation showcase each year, so that's highlighting good practice in terms of young people, organisations that have involved young people in their decision making. And just in terms of presenting information, I guess this is something that we've all learnt as well. It's just the importance of infographics, giving things in clear, accessible ways for young people to get, to get information. But I mean, it's really not. It's not just young people. I think it's all of us. It's the kind of way that getting information in visually stimulating and concise ways is important. So one of the things, just coming back to the sort of, I guess, ending where we started, just around stereotypes, one of the things that young people have told us is, in terms of the representations that they see in media of them, that it's often, it doesn't really reflect who they are. So the competition closes on the 15th of July. I've got some handouts that I'll leave here, but if you would like to take one, that'd be great, and encourage any young people you know to take a picture of themselves, put it about themselves, and send it in to us. That would be wonderful, and all the instructions are on the double-sided flyer. It's 1 minute to go, and I just have to say thank you.